Hello, CCR students. Today we are going to be going over Skill 4, Factor by Grouping. Let's dive in. So we're going to start with some vocab here. We have our greatest common factor, which is the largest piece, largest factor. That all of our numbers share. Whether that be a variable or a number or a combination of those. And then we have this factor by grouping. And factor by grouping is usually used with more than 3 terms in our equations. So usually four terms. And what we do is we are going to group our expression into smaller parts that share a group GCF. A GCF or a factor, just a common factor. Okay? And we typically do this when there is an expression that doesn't have a GCF by itself. So we used when there is no GCF. In the larger expression. Okay? So let's look at this in an examples format. We're going to take our greatest common factor from 15x minus 12 here. So question is, does either term share a variable, such as an x? Well, 15x is our first term, and negative 12 is our second term. Neither of these share an x, so no, they do not. And then it asks us, what is the largest number or variable that evenly divides into both terms? That is our GCF. So we're looking for a number that divides into 15x and negative 12 evenly. That number is going to be 3. 3 goes into 15x 5 times, or 5x times. And then negative 12, when divided by 3, is negative 4. So we're going to divide both of our terms by their GCF, and then we place the GCF in front and the remainder after in parentheses. So this is going to be 15x minus 12. I'm going to take this one divided by 3 and this one divided by 3. And that's going to give me 5x minus 4. Those are my remainders. And I put my GCF in front right there. Okay. So here are a couple of our examples from our homework here. We have some simple ones, and then we have a slightly harder one, which is hidden by the way that this is formatted. Whoops. This is supposed to be our harder version right here. So let's do our first easy version first. So I'm going to look at 2 minus 12x, and I'm going to look first, do they share an x? They do not. So I'm going to look for the biggest number that goes into both of them evenly. Well, 2 can be divided by 1 and 2, and that is it. So the greatest common factor of 2 is going to be 2. Then the greatest common factor of 12 is also 2, because we can't go any higher. So these can both be divided by 2. That 2 is going to come out in front right here. And then 2 divided by 2 is 1. And negative 12x divided by 2 is negative 6x. So now I have factored that expression. Now we're going to take a look at our harder example. Harder example here says negative 10x squared plus 70x. So again, I'm going to look for a common factor. Do they share a variable? This time, they do. The shared variable is x, right? 10x squared actually has 2 x's in it, and 70x has 1. So I can take that part out. And just right here, I'm just going to write that I'm dividing this by x. There is also a number that they both share. They both share a negative 10. 70 can always be divided by a negative 10. And that is going to divide out. I'm going to have negative 10x in front. Negative 10x squared divided by negative 10x. This negative 10 will cancel. one of these x's will cancel. I still have one left, so that x is going to remain inside. And then I'm going to take 70x divided by negative 10x. So 70 divided by negative 10 is negative 7. And then my x's here are going to cancel. So that is what's left on the inside. So now I have a greatest common factor on the outside right here, and then my remainder on the inside. So now we're going to try to apply this greatest common factor concept to factor by grouping. Okay? So we look at this expression. This expression has 4 terms. And we're going to think, what is the greatest common factor of this expression? Well, I know that it is not a variable because x cubed minus 4x squared minus 2x. And then I see plus 8. 8 does not have an x in it. So x cannot be the greatest common factor here. And then I'm going to look for numbers. Well, the greatest common factor of x cubed, that is a number, is just 1, right? They don't have any other numbers that go into it. So there's no number shared between all 4 of these terms. So what we're going to do is that even though this does not have a greatest common factor, we can factor it by grouping. And the steps to doing that are real simple. So we are going to first group our first 2 terms in parentheses and then the last 2 terms in parentheses. What that literally looks like is I'm going to write x cubed minus 4x squared, and I'm going to put those in parentheses. All I did was rewrite this right here. Now I'm going to put a plus sign right here because they're being added together, and then I'm going to group my last 2 terms, which are negative 2x. I carry that negative 2. That negative sign goes inside of my parentheses, plus 8. So this literally just came right down here. That's our first step. And now we are going to treat these as 2 separate expressions from here on. Okay, so I am going to factor out, and I'm going to look for the greatest common factor of my first 2 terms. Just my first 2 terms. So right here. Just here. I'm going to ignore the rest of it for now. So the greatest common factor of x cubed minus 4x squared. I'm going to look for a variable. They both share a variable. They share x. How many times do they share it? Well, they share it 2 times. Right? X squared. So I'm going to take out x squared from both of these. I'm going to take out x squared from both of these. That's going to leave me with an x here. And when I divide this x squared by x squared, these exponents are going to subtract from each other. That's what I'm doing here. These exponents subtract from each other. So x cubed minus x squared is 3 minus 2, which is 1x left. And then I have a 4 here, my second term. Okay? And then I have plus negative 2x plus 8 right here. Then I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor of just my last 2 terms here. So the greatest common factor here is they don't share an x. The factors of 8 are 1, 2, and 4, and 8. So I see that the first 2 terms, the first term and the second term share a 2. Not just a 2, but a negative 2. I'm going to factor that out. I'm just going to rewrite my expression down here. This is work that I've already done. And then I'm going to take out that negative 2 and factor it out. So it goes in front, and then everything left over goes inside. Negative 2x divided by negative 2 leaves me with an x. And then 8 divided by negative 2 is a negative 4. And that's what I want. I want these two parentheses to look the same. I want them to be the same expression. So my final step here is, after I've taken all of my greatest common factors out, I'm going to rewrite this expression. I'm going to group the 2 terms outside of my parentheses together, and then I'm going to combine the parentheses into one single term. So what that means is I am going to take this and this, because they are outside of my parentheses, and I'm going to write them as x squared and then minus 2. And this is going to get its own set of parentheses. And these 2 terms that are the same, they are going to combine right here, right behind it, as x minus 4. So whatever is in these parentheses gets written behind it as just one set, x minus 4. And now it's factored. I have 2 factors here. Let's try out an example here. It says, factor this expression completely. I have x to the third minus 2x squared minus 7x plus 14. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. First thing I'm going to do is look for a greatest common factor for everything. I can tell you now that there isn't one. They don't share any numbers, and they don't all share a variable. 14 does not have a variable. Oops. So I'm going to move forward with factor by grouping. I take my first two terms right here and put parentheses around them. And then I'm going to put parentheses around this, my last two terms. So I'm going to rewrite this here. X cubed minus 2x squared. There's a plus in here. I have minus 7x plus 14. All I've done is group so far. Now I look for the greatest common factor in here. They both share an x. They actually share two x's. And I can take that out. So that becomes x squared. Then I have an x left. X cubed minus, or divided by x squared is x. And then x squared divided by x squared is -2 right here. Negative 2x squared, I'm sorry, divided by x squared is -2. And now I'm going to look for the greatest common factor in here. They both don't share a variable, so there's no x's that can come out. But 14 is divisible by -7, and -7 is also divisible by -7. That's their greatest common factor. So I'm going to divide by -7. That term comes on the outside. My greatest common factor comes out. And I have x in here. -7 divided by -7 is just a 1. And then 14 divided by -7 is -2. And these two terms look the same, or these two expressions look the same. My remainders are the same. That's what I want. So I can move forward. I'm going to take my outside, my variables, or not my variables, I'm sorry, my greatest common factors, and I group them. X squared minus 7. They get their own parentheses. And then my remainders, they combine into 1 x minus 2. They both go over here. So now I'm going to give you guys a chance to try this. I want you guys to go ahead and group these and then factor them. I want you to think about that you should always look for a greatest common factor. I'm going to give you a hint. There is not one in this one because, as you can see, our 32 at the very end, our positive 32, doesn't have a variable. And then none of these factors will go into each other number. So go ahead and take a second, see if you can group this, and then factor them by grouping, and we'll come back. Okay, so first thing, we add our parentheses. We're going to group our first two terms, and then we're going to group our last two terms. And then we treat them as individual expressions. So I can take x squared out of 3x cubed plus 2x squared. That x squared comes out. 3x cubed divided by x squared is 3x. And then 2x squared divided by x squared is 2. And if we have 48x plus 32, one of our hints here is now that I've arrived after taking out my greatest common factors here, I know that my second set of parentheses needs to match it. So even though I haven't taken anything out yet, hypothetically, I know that it's going to look like 3x plus 2. Well, another way to do this is I can look for this this relation right here. If I divide 32 by 2, I get 16, which is my greatest common factor. So I know that 16 can come out. That's the biggest piece. So 16 comes out. 48x divided by 16 is 3x. And then 32 divided by 16 is 2. It's our greatest common factor. And now I'm going to group my first two terms, or my greatest common factor. I'm going to group those, my outside terms. And I group my remainder as one term. All right, so this time I want you guys to try a slightly harder problem. I remember to look for a greatest common factor first. My hint for you is there is a greatest common factor in this one. Go ahead and see if you can find it, and then we will come back together. Okay, so the greatest common factor of all of these numbers was actually 4. I can take 4 out of 12m cubed, take 4 out of -24m squared, take 4 out of negative 8m, and take 4 out of 16. When I do, I'm going to rewrite it as 4 times my remainder, which is 3m cubed minus 6m squared minus 2m plus 4. Now, when I move forward, I no longer have a greatest common factor on the inside of my parentheses. I'm not going to remember this 4 until the end. So I am now going to group these factors, but I'm only going to group what's in my parentheses. So I'm going to group here and here. My last 2 terms, my first 2 terms. I'm not including the 4 as part of my first 2 terms. It is going to get carried down, but it is not going to be used. So I'm going to have a 4 here. It's going to get carried down. The greatest common factor of my inside, right here, inside this parentheses, is 3m squared, right? They both are divisible by 3. They're both divisible by m, actually squared, right? So what I'm going to be left with after I'm taking this 3m out, I'm actually going to put a little bracket here to remind me to keep this 4 separate. I'm going to have m, right? 3m cubed divided by 3m squared. Those exponents are going to subtract from each other. So 3 minus 2 leaves me with just 1m. And then these 2m squareds are going to cancel. Negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2 right there. So that is my first group. And then I'm going to look at the second one. The greatest common factor here is 2, negative 2. You can always take out a negative right here. And that actually matches because that's going to make our m positive instead of negative. I'm going to have minus 2 here. Negative 2m divided by negative 2 is m. And 4 divided by negative 2 is negative 2. So now I have my inside terms, my remainders, they are the same, which is what I want. So I can regroup this. I'm going to take my greatest common factors and combine them into one group. Parentheses right here. Then I'm going to take my remainders and group those into one group. There we go. And I'm also going to pull down this 4. This 4 is going to come right in front to remind me to put it back in when I'm all done. And that is factored. I can no longer take anything else out of it. I want you to go ahead and get a start on your Delta Math assignment. If you have any questions, feel free to email, contact any way you can. You're going to work on grouping, factor by grouping, obviously, and also finding the greatest common factors of these expressions. So hopefully you get a little bit of practice in, and you're a little bit more confident with it. Have a great day. I look forward to seeing you.